technology impact assessment and also public engagement strategies. But let's hear perhaps from Mahmud now, and we can come back to you, Elisa, if you're still online.
Sure.
And Andy, perhaps some more things will unravel during the next discussion. Mahmud, over to you. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here and to follow up what Elisa suggested, that talk about my background. So I used to call myself a recovering engineer. Then I came to academia. Now I sort of try to say I'm a recovering academic. And one of the things is that I get to be at the fun spot because I work in Washington, D.C. at the ASU Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes. So I'm at the interface between academia and practice. And and because we work in this institution that prides itself on this innovation, I get to try and fail. And because of that, I get to, try things and work with both, people who are in academia, both who are in practice, to basically try to operationalize these ideas. Okay, I understand all of this, but how do I actually do it? How do I make a difference? And my work in that area falls into two buckets. So one set of questions asks, how can we make science and technology useful? And the other question is, how can we make science and technology decisions more democratic? And the answer to both of those two questions comes around the question of the public. We are talking about, this is the general order of things. Like, we started with talking about the concept, and now we are finally talking about public. So public is always at the end of the process. This is by design. It's not by failure, because when Vannevar Bush designed science and technology policy, he put research at the front and society at the end. But the whole idea is that, we're trying to do these things for society. Shouldn't we ask society first what it wants to do? So a lot of my work is basically trying to go and ask that question. Should we or should we not? And if we should, then how? And this is what the course that I am delighted to actually develop based on what we have learned by doing this work, this public engagement. And it's basically, the strategies for doing that. So I'm going to share my screen to basically say, why do we even need public engagement? Let me see if I can find it. Yes, and are you able to see my screen or no? Did I? Okay. So I was going to talk about the course, but I'm going to start with talking about why do we need to engage the public. One of the things so I'm going to start with the story. So let's start with the story that I've been working on, with autonomous vehicles. So where we were in 2017. So if 2017, what we were seeing that this was an inevitable revolution that was going to come and take over. And if you look at the statements being given by experts in the industry, was that, we're going to have this, not in 2020, in 2017. And the urban planners, policymakers, everybody says, okay, this is coming. So what do we do? So you look at what the conversation was in 2017 was that, okay, we have to design these cities now. And how do we frame? How do we sort of define what problems we're going to solve with this new technology? Not the other way around. So you have these Boston consulting groups laying out all these scenarios where we have actually fast forwarded, there is this different levels of automation, all the way to where we don't have a driver, we don't have a steering wheel. And now let's arrange the pieces and see how we can design our urban systems to reduce accidents, to free up parking spaces, to reduce emissions, all wonderful things. But, what was public thinking about that at that time? So we went and spent a few weekends with people in rural Maryland and also urban Maryland, just to ask them, okay, what are your hopes and concerns? You know, there's this thing, this big revolution's coming, but you know, what you're thinking about it. And they said, geez, I'm not really sure because I don't know if I want to give up control completely. So I get, you know, I don't actually see a completely driverless situation. I like what it does. I want to assist it, but I'm not actually thinking all that far. So so people are grappling with the issue of control and automation, how much to give, how much to retain. Then they're thinking about jobs. Okay, I'm going to lose jobs, I'm going to gain jobs, but how do I retrain myself? I mean, they're thinking about, okay, I'm a volunteer firefighter and I'm going to rescue somebody from a car. And how do I cut into these things that I don't know? So I need retraining. And then why do you take away jobs? We're a one-stop, you know, one truck stop town. We want the trucks to be safer, but don't take away our jobs. So this whole complex issue of jobs and employment, about retraining that nobody was talking about. And then about safety, the whole thing gets sold because of, you know, it's going to save lives because we're going to take the human out of the equation. But will I be even feel safe to get in one? What happens to my data? What happens to my, you know, privacy? What happens to my security? So it's a very different framing of the problem. So what happens? So what happens in 2019 is we have the industry people now coming in and saying, hey, don't call this self-driving, don't call this autopilot, don't call this, we don't have that yet. You know, it's all about damage control and managing expectation. And what we're seeing now is what's being said is that, hey, we can't do this at society. We need to actually do it with society. And you have auto executives now saying that this actually the technical problem, the policy problem, we're eventually going to solve. But if we don't have the public with us, all of this is for nothing. So that sort of sets up, you know, what this course that I would like to share our learning with is all about. So it's about two types of failures. So one type of failure is obviously we can have market success, but we can have public value failure. So this is what Jumana started out saying, right to profit without leaving our conscience at the door. So can we do both? Can we have market success and also public value success? And can we also take care of those missed opportunities where we have technology looking for society? Okay, we have this thing, what do we do with it? And then public asking for something and nobody is building. So these two type of things we can address by engaging with the public. But it's not the same thing, because what Elissa was talking about, what Bob was talking about, what Eric was talking about, are all different types of technology at different stages of development. Some are emerging. So we need to decide, okay, should we or should we not do this? Some are there, but we need to figure out how. So public engagement is not one size fits all. It's different in different contexts. It's different whether you're in industry, whether you're in government, whether you're in academia. So how do we kind of organize this in a kind of systematic way so we can actually, you know, help technologists, planners, decision makers, you know, engage the public in a way that helps them make better decisions about what they're doing. So the course that I've thought about is laid out in 8 sequence and basically tries to get at that in a systematic way. So the first way is what's the rationale? Why do we want to do this? Why do you want to bring in the public? Why do you want to flip the model of innovation? Why and how do we, what happens if we don't do it? So we sort of, the first part is to lay out the argument for that. And then we talk about, okay, there's a lot of definitional thing. I say public engagement, somebody says science communication, somebody says, you know, public understanding of science. How does all of those things fit in? What are the boundaries? What is the vocabulary? What is the language? What's the typology? So once we get that out of the way, then we talk about, okay, now let's think about how we're going to design this. How do we can do informed, inclusive, integrated public engagement? So Eric was talking about how do you articulate, what the public value is, what the public need is, and that means like a two-way engagement. So how we can include those voices, from those indigenous voices, those people with disabilities, people who are marginalized, people who are systematically left out of the conversation in all of this process. So it's different set of questions depending on where you are in the technology spectrum. So if you're in upstream, let's say something about gene editing or geoengineering, it doesn't exist. It's all hypothetical. Should we or should we not do? It's a different set of questions. So you need to actually a lot more education before the public can actually engage with you. And you need to actually talk about scenarios, because it's not an A and B choices yet, right? So then we have the midstream stuff. This automated vehicle. Yeah, we have the technology. We figured out LiDAR. We have figured out all of these things, but how do we blend it? How does facial recognition software work? How does, we make it actually do the things that we would like to do and also protect us from the harm that it can happen. So this whole thing with the COVID and the pandemic response is one of those midstream. It's not breakthrough technologies. We have to make decisions as we are innovating. And then there are some things where, okay, the technology is pretty much settled, meaning like we are talking about establishing boundaries, 21st century policing, surveillance technologies, right? Okay, that's a different set of questions. So the public engagement in all of these cases are very, very different, and it needs to be strategic and it needs to be integrated with the decision-making environment we're working in. And finally, there's another element that's also very, in vogue now, is the whole idea of innovating with the public. So in the science side, it looks like citizen science. In the technology, it's the maker movement. So it's now you have non-traditional, non-expert who haven't really trained in those things, actually participating and innovating. So how do we do all of these together? And finally, the last piece is, okay, the integration. So how can we come up with a strategy so we can actually not just talk about these things, but do it in a way we avoid those failures that I talked about, the missed opportunity failure and also the public value failure. So that's where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahmud.